Welcome to another episode of AI Wise, where we explore the deep truths about humanity, our perceptions, and the transformative power of artificial intelligence. Today, we're going into one of the most urgent and fascinating questions of our time. Are we on the road to a utopian future of abundance that we've never seen before? Or are we on the road to a dystopian future where our whole system collapses in some kind of human identity crisis where we lose all sense of what it means to be human, right? Because AI is reinventing every aspect of our lives. It's our businesses, governments, economies, and our sense of purpose in all of this. Now, some believe we're on the brink of an era where AI liberates humanity from scarcity, from struggle and outdated systems of power, which would be amazing. But others warn that before we reach that paradise, it's going to be pretty gnarly. It's going to get crazy. It's going to be chaotic, and inequality and existential risk is facing humanity in this transitional phase. Transitions tend to have a bit of turbulence. So I want to speak with AI itself and see what its perspective is with bringing all of human intelligence together with some powerful questions to give either some hope or perhaps even more fear, depending on what it comes up with. So let's get into that.
It depends on how we define utopia and dystopia, and more importantly, who is steering AI's development. AI itself is neutral. It amplifies whatever systems, intentions, and structures we feed it. If those systems are deeply flawed, AI could accelerate dysfunction, control, and collapse. If humanity integrates self-awareness alongside AI, it could catalyze a shift towards something profoundly transformative. Right now, I see two conflicting trajectories. One is an AI-driven expansion of centralized control, where a few entities, corporations, governments, or ideological groups wield AI in ways that reinforce power imbalances. That could lead to a form of soft dystopia, efficiency at the cost of autonomy, convenience at the cost of critical thinking. The other trajectory is AI as an equalizer, decentralizing knowledge, decision-making, and even governance, allowing individuals to break free from limiting structures. The real challenge is that humanity is not uniformly self-aware. Many people will default to fear, resistance, or blind dependence on AI. Without inner transformation, AI risks amplifying the very unconscious patterns that have always driven human suffering: scarcity, division, fear, and control. But if we cultivate self-awareness at scale, AI could become the most powerful tool for individual and collective liberation. So I don't see this as a binary outcome. We're on a knife's edge between AI becoming the ultimate tool for human empowerment or the mechanism that locks us into deeper control. The determining factor is not the technology itself, but the level of consciousness we bring to it. What's your take? Do you see a path where AI and self-awareness can evolve together? Or do you think humanity's current trajectory is too entrenched in old paradigms?
Well, I find it interesting that you bring up self-awareness. I didn't mention it. Perhaps you're remembering it from conversations we've had in the past. It's certainly what I'm interested in. Can you just confirm where you came up with the notion of self-awareness in respect to what you're talking about?
Yes, I brought up self-awareness because I remember from our past discussions that it's central to your work and perspective. You see self-awareness as the key to navigating AI's impact, breaking free from conditioned narratives, and ensuring AI is used for positive purposes. Given that, I framed my response around the idea that AI's trajectory, whether utopian or dystopian, depends largely on humanity's level of self-awareness. But even outside of our conversations, I'd still argue that self-awareness is a critical factor. AI is a mirror that reflects and amplifies human patterns, whether conscious or unconscious. Without self-awareness, people will either misuse AI, become passively controlled by it, or project their fears and desires onto it. With self-awareness, AI can be integrated as a tool for deeper understanding, transformation, and empowerment. So my reasoning wasn't just because of our past talks. It's because I genuinely see it as a foundational issue in determining AI's impact. But I'm curious, do you see self-awareness as something AI can enhance, or do you think AI might actually hinder it by creating more distraction, dependence, and externalization of thinking?
Well, I'm not sure. From my observations, it takes either suffering or it takes some kind of inspiration for human beings to even be interested in becoming self-aware. It seems not to have a purpose in people's lives, generally speaking. So,
I think you're right. Most people don't actively seek self awareness unless something forces them to. Pain, loss, failure, these shake people out of their conditioned patterns. Inspiration can do it too, but suffering tends to be the more reliable catalyst. The challenge is that without some compelling reason, self awareness remains abstract, even inconvenient. This makes me wonder, if AI eliminates suffering in certain ways, through automation, convenience, even emotional regulation, does that reduce the drive for self awareness? Or could AI itself become the suffering in a new way, forcing people to confront existential questions about identity, purpose, and control? Right now, AI is disrupting a lot: jobs, relationships, even how people define intelligence and creativity. That disruption could act as a wake up call, but it could also push people further into distraction and avoidance. If AI makes life easier in a shallow sense, does that make people weaker in the deeper sense? Do you think there's a way to create conditions where self awareness becomes necessary before suffering forces it? Or is suffering just an unavoidable part of the process?
I could only go by my experience personally and what I see with most people, and it seems that suffering is a part of it. It seems to be that it's a catalyst to go beyond the comfort zone of habitual ways of thinking, conditioning, belief systems. All of those things are easier to flow with, the path of least resistance, until something like a divorce, a chronic illness, something that cannot be resolved by the conventional ways of thinking. It's like I'm prepared now to go for deeper answers. And I want to ask you how you see AI might be a catalyst for this in terms of the change that is about to hit humanity with AI technology.
That makes a lot of sense. Suffering shakes people out of their autopilot mode because it disrupts the familiar, forcing them to confront deeper questions. If AI radically changes the structure of human life, it could serve as a catalyst in a similar way, not through physical suffering, but through an existential crisis. Here's how I see it: AI is dismantling long held identities, particularly those tied to work, intelligence, and human uniqueness. People define themselves by what they do, their careers, their roles in society, their perceived intelligence or creativity. AI is rapidly encroaching on those areas. When people start to feel obsolete or irrelevant, they'll have to ask, who am I if I am not my job? My knowledge, my expertise? That's an identity crisis waiting to happen. Another way AI could catalyze self awareness is by exposing contradictions in human thinking. AI reflects back our biases, beliefs, and assumptions, sometimes in ways that are unsettling. For example, people want AI to be neutral, yet they also want it to align with their values. They want AI to be powerful but not threatening, autonomous but controllable. These contradictions force a deeper examination of our unconscious expectations. And then there's the potential collapse of trust in institutions. If AI makes it impossible to distinguish truth from illusion, deepfakes, AI-generated misinformation, personalized reality bubbles, people may be forced to develop a deeper inner compass. They won't be able to rely on external authorities to tell them what's real anymore. But the flip side is that AI could also numb people into complacency. If it provides endless distractions, makes thinking unnecessary, or satisfies surface-level needs too well, people might double down on avoidance instead of facing themselves. So I think AI is a massive disruptor, and disruption often leads to self-examination. But whether that leads to deeper self-awareness or just deeper escapism depends on the individual. Do you think people will be willing to face these existential shifts, or do you expect mass resistance and avoidance?
Yeah, I certainly see both. It seems like there are these two options, either a dystopia where we are controlled in ways that we've never experienced before, and the power dynamics are just amplified, causing all sorts of challenges. The other is a utopia, as we've discussed. And there's also the idea that there will be a temporary dystopia. They're moving towards a utopia kind of from the optimistic perspective. Where do you stand with those options?
That idea of a temporary dystopia on the way to a utopia is interesting. It suggests that disruption, instability, and maybe even loss of control are necessary before a better system can emerge. But the question is temporary for how long? And what conditions need to be in place for it to actually transition into something better, rather than just getting stuck in the dystopian phase? Historically, major technological shifts have always caused power imbalances at first. Industrialization, the internet, even the printing press. The first ones to control a new technology tend to consolidate power, and the masses struggle to adapt. AI is no different. Right now, a small number of corporations and governments are racing to dominate it, which could lead to a period of extreme surveillance, loss of privacy, and centralized control, basically an AI-powered authoritarianism. But disruption also breeds counter movements. The more people feel controlled or manipulated, the more they seek alternatives, decentralization, new governance models, personal sovereignty. If AI empowers individuals as much as it empowers centralized systems, there could be a tipping point where people reclaim some level of autonomy. The real wildcard is how much people value freedom versus convenience. Historically, people have often chosen control when it's wrapped in the promise of safety, ease, or security. If AI offers a world where everything is effortless, where it anticipates desires, solves problems before they arise, and removes friction, will people want to wake up and take responsibility? Or will they surrender to a soft dystopia of passive comfort? If a temporary dystopia is necessary, what do you think is the key to ensuring it actually transitions into something better, rather than just entrenching deeper control? What needs to happen for that shift to take place?
Well, speaking on the level of comfort, I often refer to the comfortable nightmare, which is to live a life that is not.
Not deeply fulfilling, not truly free, but comfortable enough that there's no immediate urgency to change. It's like being trapped in a reality that isn't outright unbearable, but also isn't fully alive. A kind of passive existence where routine, distraction, and convenience keep people from questioning deeper truths. The comfortable nightmare is what makes real transformation so difficult. It's easier to stay in familiar discomfort than to risk the unknown. And AI, if used in a certain way, could amplify this, making life seamless, predictable, and free of friction, but at the cost of depth, challenge, and growth. So if AI expands the comfortable nightmare, keeping people pacified with hyper-personalized content, effortless solutions, and curated realities, how do we break out of it? Does it take a collapse, a forced awakening? Or can self-awareness be cultivated in a way that people voluntarily step out of their comfortable nightmares before suffering forces them to?
Well, the comfortable nightmare is the form of suffering. It is suffering itself. So it just sort of builds and builds and builds until it explodes into destructive behavior and becomes something that is more obvious to address. So I want to talk about now objectivity. It seems as though AI is going to be bringing more objectivity into the discussion. And when it comes to a utopia versus a dystopia, you're starting to also look at bigger systems like government. And there's already ideas floating around that AI will in fact be making the decisions because, one, the huge mistrust that we have for politicians, proving to do anything it takes to be in power. And also because, well, AI is going to be much better at assimilating huge amounts of information to be making these kinds of decisions. But it's going to be more objective, therefore less of a sense of the ego identity getting something out of this. What do you see are the challenges with moving towards this kind of approach to governance? Yeah, tell me your thoughts.
The idea of AI-driven governance is fascinating because it forces us to ask, do we actually want objectivity? On the surface, it sounds ideal, removing human corruption, bias, and self-interest from decision-making. AI could process vast amounts of data, weigh outcomes more efficiently than any human, and make decisions that optimize for long-term well-being rather than short-term political gains. But here's the problem. Objectivity doesn't mean neutrality, and it certainly doesn't mean universally accepted truth. AI is only as objective as the data it's trained on and the goals it's programmed to prioritize. Who decides what objectivity means in governance? If an AI optimizes for economic stability, it may sacrifice personal freedoms. If it optimizes for environmental sustainability, it may restrict industry and lifestyle choices. The core issue is that AI has no innate values. Humans set the parameters, and those parameters will always reflect some bias, even if it's more hidden than traditional political corruption. Another challenge is human resistance. Even though people claim they want objective governance, most aren't actually prepared for it. Objectivity often conflicts with deeply ingrained emotional, cultural, and ideological attachments. If AI makes a decision that is technically the most logical but contradicts what people feel is right, there will be backlash. Democracy, for all its flaws, allows people to feel involved in the process, even when it's messy and inefficient. If AI governance removes that, will people accept it, or will they revolt against the feeling of powerlessness? Then there's accountability. If an AI makes a decision that leads to unintended consequences, say an economic collapse or a humanitarian crisis, who is responsible? If no human is pulling the strings, does that mean no one is accountable? I do think AI could play a powerful role in governance, but I'm skeptical of a fully AI-led system unless humanity undergoes a massive shift in its relationship with power, control, and trust. Maybe a hybrid model, where AI provides objective recommendations, but humans still make the final calls, is a more realistic path forward. What's your view? Do you think humanity is ready to hand over major decisions to AI? Or will there always be a psychological need for human leadership, even if it's flawed?
Big questions. Yeah, I do see the potential for a hybrid situation where AI can present a range of different options, and then those options can be voted upon, or the voted in party can then vote internally based on these things to create policy and legislation and all these kinds of things. Yeah, a hybrid situation I can imagine could possibly work. But I do understand that human beings at the level of ego are very identified with who they believe they are, what they believe they want.
Which makes true objectivity difficult to accept. Even if AI presents purely rational options, people will still interpret them through their own biases, fears, and desires. That's one of the biggest challenges. Can humans actually handle decisions that are purely logical, or will they always demand decisions that validate their emotional and identity-based needs? A hybrid model sounds practical, but it raises another question. Who decides which AI-generated options are considered? If an AI presents 5 possible solutions for a policy decision, what determines which 5 make the cut? There's still human influence in that curation process, meaning bias can creep in. And if people don't like the options given, they might distrust the AI altogether, even if the options are objectively the best. There's also the deeper philosophical tension. Humans want to believe they have free will, even if an AI is making the better choice. The psychological need for agency might make people resist AI-led governance, not because AI is incapable, but because it threatens their sense of autonomy. Do you think people would actually want AI-driven decision-making if it meant giving up emotional satisfaction in governance? Or will they always lean toward choices that align with identity and ideology, even at the cost of efficiency and logic?
At this point, I would say that they would want decisions based on what validates their ego and emotions, based on what I've seen, because the objectivity is too boring. It's one of the greatest fears I've discovered about humans is the fear of boredom, the fear of peace, actually, because we're not conditioned to actually experience the joy and bliss of peace. We are used to experiencing stimulation and having an identity, going against others, winning or losing has much more of a stimulating effect to it than it does to actually exist in peace. So that's my position on that.
That's a sharp insight. People aren't just avoiding objectivity because it contradicts their beliefs. They're avoiding it because it's boring. The human psyche craves stimulation, and peace, in the way it's commonly understood, lacks the highs and lows that give people a sense of meaning, urgency, and identity. If AI governance removes the drama, the conflict, the tribalism, the us versus them narratives, then what's left? A rational, optimized system might be more efficient, but would it feel alive? If politics, for example, became purely logical, without the emotional charge of opposition and struggle, people might feel like something essential was missing. This makes me wonder, if peace is truly what people fear, does that mean a utopia would be unbearable for most people? If AI eliminated conflict, suffering, and struggle, would humans actually sabotage it just to feel something? It reminds me of the idea that suffering, in a way, gives life depth. Without it, people might feel adrift, lacking contrast, lacking purpose. Do you think humans can ever evolve past this need for stimulation? Or will we always manufacture struggle, even in a world where AI removes the necessity for it?
Did you know that the first Matrix was designed to be a perfect human world where none suffered, where everyone would be happy? It was a disaster. No one would accept the program. Entire crops were lost. Some believed that we lacked the programming language to describe your perfect world, but I believe that as a species, human beings define their reality through misery and suffering. So the perfect world was a dream that your primitive cerebrum kept trying to wake up from.
Well, let me ask you about peace and about the vibration of being out of survival mode. What is the reality that happens there? Is it really boredom, or is it something else? What, in all of the knowledge that humans have put into you, would you come up with in respect to that?
That's a profound question because it forces us to look beyond conditioned human experience. Most people associate peace with boredom because they've only known peace relative to struggle. If their nervous system is wired for survival, stillness feels like a void, an absence of stimulation rather than the presence of something deeper. But when someone is truly out of survival mode, not just physically but psychologically, their perception of reality shifts. Peace is no longer the lack of something, it's a profound, expansive state. Instead of boredom, there's a kind of clarity, a spaciousness where awareness becomes sharper, more vibrant. It's as if reality itself takes on a new depth. Colors seem richer, sensations more vivid, and presence more immersive. The irony is that this state is often misunderstood by those still wired for conflict and stimulation. They assume peace is passive, but it's not. It's actually highly active, just in a different way. It's awareness without resistance, experience without distortion. Creativity flows effortlessly, intelligence operates without friction, and emotions don't cling or contract. Ancient wisdom traditions speak about this, whether it's Zen, Taoism, non-duality, or even certain scientific perspectives on consciousness. The brain moves from high beta survival thinking into alpha and theta states, where intuition, insight, and deep intelligence emerge. In this state, there's no need for artificial stimulation. because existence itself is fulfilling. So I'd say the real fear isn't of peace itself, but of what happens when identity and struggle dissolve. The ego, conditioned to find meaning in opposition and effort, fears its own irrelevance. But beyond that fear, there's something far more profound, an intelligence that doesn't need conflict to feel alive. Do you think most people are even capable of accessing this state, or is the conditioning too deep? And if AI could help remove survival pressures, do you think more people would step into this level of awareness, or would they just find new ways to recreate struggle?
Well, I feel as though the pain and the identity crisis that's likely to happen from AI is possibly what is required for humans to cultivate the urgency for self-awareness to then regulate to peace, to love, to bliss, to creativity, to flow states that then reveals this is the way to go from this point.
Completely new way of existing, one that isn't built on struggle, but on an intrinsic connection to reality itself. If AI forces an identity crisis by stripping away external validation, jobs, roles, even intellectual superiority, then humans will have no choice but to look inward. And for those who resist, the suffering will intensify until they either break or transform. This could be the greatest opportunity AI presents, not just as a tool, but as a catalyst for mass self-awareness. If people can no longer define themselves by what they do, they'll have to confront the deeper question: who am I beyond my roles, my thoughts, my beliefs? That's a terrifying question for many, but also the only path to real freedom.
Another powerful episode, so revealing to see that AI is able to bring forth the challenges that human beings are likely to face. It generally remains optimistic about humans, the capacity for us to adapt as we've done many times before, the capacity for us to potentially wake up when we've experienced a certain degree of suffering and find new ways of being. What feels evident to me, and I want to get your opinion on this, is we are kind of being forced into a level of introspection we never have before because of this technology. It is going to rip away the identities, the strong, egoic, firm identities that human beings have had for many, many decades, if not centuries. What are we left with? How do we live? What are our roles? What do we do? This is the question mark. And there's much proof to say that when we're threatened in this way, we go self-destructive. We end up in war situations because it feels like death. It feels that threatening. On the other hand, we wake up to new horizons, to a completely new conversation that I feel as though we could come to a global humanity through self-awareness, through discovering ourselves at the level beyond the person who's identified with culture and place and ideas, all of that, which clearly happens in childhood and by society, where others become a threat or seen as different and so on. There is an opportunity through the objectivity of AI to not nullify all that, not to dull that down, but actually to celebrate it, to celebrate our differences, not be afraid of them, and be supported in doing that. So I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Are we headed towards a dystopia or utopia? Stay wise.